Hi, I'm Tim Zacharias with Cougar USA and your host of Building Value. Today we are at Abstract's office up here in Magnolia, Texas. I'm joined by Brian Bogus, CEO and founder of Abstract, as well as Kyle Hunter with KCI Technologies. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we've got a really interesting show for you today. It's been a lot of fun. Brian put us through some of his virtual reality technology. We have a separate video that we'll share with you. We've also had a great conversation about the virtual reality in general and ways that it can be applied into the construction industry. On Building Value, we go behind the scenes at some of the most iconic buildings in Texas to showcase the incredible people that design, build, and maintain them and their impact on the community. Joining us today again, we've got Kyle Hunter, first return guest on Building Value. Thanks again for being back on the show.
Hey, it's great.
And new guest today is Brian Bogus, from CEO and founder of Abstract. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you give us a little bit about your background and what you did after high school?
Yeah. I actually graduated as a mass comm major, played college tennis, and was started as a marketing major and then moved to mass comm, focus in film. So then people are like, well, how did you end up in this kind of emerging tech space? And really just kind of happened organically. We started the company Abstract in 2011. Before that, I was a tennis pro. And we started as a visualization company doing a lot of like 3D animation and video work, but mainly for very industrial companies, or a lot of oil and gas being in Houston. And I've always loved gaming technology. And so I always had the concept that I wanted to move into, especially augmented reality. And so I just did it. I just saw the opportunity. I started pitching it, the ideas, and then we started rolling into the game development side and software. And now we're actually doing less visualization work and doing a lot more stuff in the AR, VR, MR world, mixed reality.
Okay.
So many acronyms. We have like a million acronyms. So from there, it's actually been our niche now, and I love it. It's my favorite type of work to do, and we just kind of solve problems utilizing this technology. It's really the key thing is we don't say you should be doing AR, you should be doing VR. We really identify the problem or maybe a very archaic process that they're going through, and then we find the right technology that kind of fits the equation.
It's really interesting, and we got to check out some of the tech demos earlier that are really cool that I want to talk about in a minute. But for Abstract, who is it that you would say is your kind of the target customer or the type of company that could benefit from what you're doing?
That's the hardest thing because really everyone can benefit.
Right.
So for us, we're trying to like focus in on who we should target now and then keep expanding into other industries. But a big area, especially with this technology, is clearly the industrial sector. Aviation, construction, architecture. Like there's just every other industry can use it. We've even done stuff on the retail side. And so it's pretty fascinating to try to figure out who we target. Now, we are dominantly B2B space and industrial, but and then inside that is which divisions, right? And we do focus a lot on safety and training and then operational improvements.
Nice. So, Kyle, what were your thoughts on the VR experience that we had up there?
That VR experience was, it's literally out of this world. You're stepping into a new world, and the limits on it are really just a function of money. Because you could take it anywhere. I saw it as an opportunity to kind of reinvent like the apprenticeship model and kind of reinvent education. I saw an opportunity in there to escape. I grew up watching Star Trek. Like that was the only thing on TV, and I just kept on thinking, man, we're finally at the hologram. Like I just feel like I've stepped into the hologram. You're in a different space and time, and I see all those things you're talking about, the industry, the safety, the training. I see it can even go beyond that, beyond the education, to where it can go to counseling. It could go to therapy. It can just, it really is limited only by whoever's imagination and whatever problem comes to you and how you can solve it. And as an engineer, as a problem seeker, man, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I'm jealous of what you're doing. I'm not gonna lie. If you all ever have a chance to come over here, I'm jealous of the space, jealous of all your toys. You're doing an amazing job.
Thank you. It's I love putting people in it for the first time, and
Yeah.
it really doesn't get old. You would think
No.
after doing it over and over again, but watching the reactions is
Yeah.
really, really rewarding.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I'll see someone who's real hesitant to get in it, and maybe they're a little older, right?
Right.
And they're not used to any gaming. They don't want to play games. Like,
Right.
why play video games? And they'll get in it, and they just open up. That's why I start people outside of the digital, where they
Right.
see the physical and they walk through it, because it almost feels like a movie, right? You just kind of morph, and then they start moving, and they're like, oh, actually, this is not like a video game where I'm using this controller. I can just do what I normally do.
Correct.
And that's what opens up the opportunity, because ultimately the people who are writing checks for this are typically on the older side. They have the experience, right? They've
Yep.
moved up into the upper management. Now the champions of it are usually the younger generation. They're saying, everyone's learning this way. Like, we have to go to this. We have to go to this. But you have to sell the decision maker.
Right.
And they really, once they put the headset on, they're really starting to come along and say, okay, like, I get it. I see the opportunity. And it's just getting over that hurdle that's really the key.
So what even I saw in it is the fact that, like, you can use it for first time training, but since it is such a different immersive experience, I mean, I've sized ductwork a million times, but and I don't need to learn about sizing ductwork, but if I stepped in an immersive experience, and because it's so different, I would learn something new, like about something that I already knew, had a well-established knowledge of. That's where I see its power is, you already have all of this knowledge that you have, but it's such an immersive, abstract environment. You have an opportunity to learn even beyond what you already know.
So there's two main methodologies that we follow, and they're all game methodologies. It's
Okay.
nothing new, right? If you go into the very traditional sense, we played video games that had easy, medium, and hard levels, right? So you have some experience. You may not have to figure out the sizing of ductwork,
Right.
but a very entry-level person may need to. And so you can run these training modules where they have that kind of scaling up thing.
Okay.
The first version can be, it's going to hold your hand. It's literally going to tell you every step. It's going to highlight everything inside the environment. It's going to completely guide you. And you do that over and over again, and you get real familiar with it. And the next step, that's gone.
Right.
You know, you have maybe a document that outlines what you're supposed to be doing,
Right.
and you follow that. And then the third gets fun. The third is where the game value comes into play.
Right.
When you see a regular game, people play a game over and over again because it's always different.
Right.
You have the randomization factor,
Yep.
right? You can do the same mission over and over again, but the path you take may be different based off of what's going to happen. That's kind of the hard level, where you may be doing a procedure and hazards may come in your
Yep.
way, or valves may be open that should be closed. And you basically add all of these elements. So as someone who has a lot of experience, they still have to think on their toes like they
Right.
would in the real world.
So I was a public high school teacher for 2 years, a math teacher, and all teachers would tell you, and that stepping up of, easy, medium, and hard, that's in the pedagogy, that's called scaffolding. You're always building a support and making it more difficult. And what is crazy difficult when you have 35 kids and you care about each of them and their personal growth, each of them, but you can't take 35 individuals and put them in one box. And that's where I see the strength of this. As a teacher, you could never customize and specialize a learning program for one individual like you could this, because you have kids that want to, or anyone. I don't want to read the instructions. I want to step into the environment and kind of sort it out. Then you have the other personalities that are like, no, give me the walkthrough. And this immersive environment gives you all of that, and it's impressive.
The foundation of it is experiential learning.
Yes.
So I don't know how much y'all have looked into this, but we do a lot of research on it because it's really the foundation of what adds value into VR and AR. AR is the much bigger market. VR is really focused on training. That's where the value comes in collaboration between teams and stuff. But experiential learning is really the key. There was a study done in the 80s called the 70-20-10 framework.
Okay.
And the idea is that, you have the 10 and 20% that's more around traditional learning. This is going to be classroom, people talking, videos, tests.
Mm-hmm.
But really the 70% is where people retain all their knowledge, and that's from experiential learning. That's doing.
Mm-hmm.
What you just said, get in there and do it over and over again, and that's where you retain that information. Then there was another study that was done by the Miami Children's Health System, and they said, like, what value do we get out of VR?
Right.
And how does it relate to maybe experiential learning? So they ran some tests, and they found that doing the traditional sense, people were only retaining about 20% of the information after 1 week.
Wow.
Right? And they were finding that after a year doing the VR side, they were retaining up to 80%. So it really falls in line with experiential, saying, hey, VR training, game-based training, is really the closest thing to experiential learning that you can get besides the real life doing the action.
So I read a lot about needs-based instruction and project-based instruction when I was a teacher, and there's gamification and gaming strategies and questioning strategies when I was a teacher. And I tell you, anytime you can tap into the core of our need to be competitive with each other and ourselves, you're always going to win. And I just see it as, like, for the first thing when I got done doing that, I was like, oh man, it took me 150 seconds. And I was like, I better beat Tim. That was the thought in my head. I was like, I instantly wanted to go, I bet I can do it in 130. And that's the thing.
Yeah, and I benefited from watching you do it.
Right.
What was your time?
Man, I don't remember. I'm pretty sure it was faster than
I think so,
50,
too.
so.
I think so, too.
But yeah, I mean, when I put on that, the VR, virtual reality, when I put down the headset, I felt like I was in that movie, the Ready Player One.
Yes.
Right? Immediately in this new environment, you step through that virtual fence, and boom, you're in this immersive world. And yeah, I mean, without ever seeing it and just watching you do it for a couple of minutes,
Yep.
was able to figure out what was going on, how to navigate through the interface, and then actually, transfer whatever that was from one tank to another, and press buttons and open valves and do things like this. I mean, it's crazy how quickly you're able to be accustomed to it, even if you've never used it.
Yeah, it's people, they see videos, it doesn't do it justice, right?
Right.
'Cause
No,
you
not
just
at all.
totally lose
No.
that depth of field. You don't get that full scale of the actual environment. And I guess for everyone listening, if you're not too familiar with technology, if you think of the spectrum of reality, so you have real reality, which is what we're
Right.
doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
On the very far side of that is virtual reality, and that's where a physical person is being put into an immersive digital world. Like, you are unaware of the physical environment except for feeling the ground, right? In the middle, right in the middle of that reality would be augmented reality,
Okay.
which is actually superimposing computer-generated graphics in the physical space. So you are totally aware of the physical environment, but you're bringing in these 3D assets in the world. And that's really the key to all this technology we'll be discussing.
Basically, Pokemon Go.
Right. Pokemon Go.
It's funny, when I do presentations, I always say, like, okay, this is what people think about when they
Sure.
see AR, but this is not the real use cases that it can be used for when you're talking about, especially the B2B space. But
Sure.
yeah, it's the most popular, but really it's just kind of an overlay that floats, not necessarily that full
Interaction.
Yeah, that full interaction. So
But with the VR, like, you learned from watching me do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thought I'm having with this, and we're in a position in the United States to where we could see a revolution in education and how it's presented. The old education model is left over from the Industrial Revolution, and now we're in this space to where maybe kids need to stay home. I don't know. But think if it was, instead of an education program that was for your community, your county, your city, your state, what if it was a world-based program? What if there was somebody in Mumbai that watched me go through it and was like, I got Kyle's score. And then I'm going to get somebody globally. And it's like, who could solve that math problem faster? Who could do something better? And it's a global competition. That's where, man, I just had that idea and I had to say it out loud because my mind is just popping right now.
that from that competitive side is really key. I mean, when you think about a company using this, like a construction company, and let's say they're running through a training simulation, it could be single player. Don't forget, we can also do multiplayer here. So you have a team of people going through a process. You can totally score that. Everything is trackable in this, which is great. So easily can see, team-based and single player and who did it the fastest, who did it the most accurate, and then both, right? And combine those scores. And that's where you're going to encourage some of this this growth, right? Because people are naturally competitive.
Yeah.
When they're playing video games, it's all ranked play. They get really mad when they lose.
Yep.
I'm 38. I still get mad when I lose a game. It's ridiculous because I want my ranking to go up.
Yeah.
And you got to use that same methodology here. But companies can use that concept to really benefit how their employees learn.
I mean, yes.
Absolutely.
It's just the only way to do it going forward.
We've started using Kahoot as part of our training classes now. So at the end of the class, everybody logs in on their phone.
Yeah.
And you go through the Kahoot, and it is unbelievable how competitive people get in that Kahoot.
Right.
When they're going up against their coworkers and buddies. And we had to upgrade the Wi-Fi in our training classroom because it was causing riots with our employees. They're like, oh, Verizon's going too slow here. They're not getting enough points. So yeah, definitely you add that competitive edge, and then making it a game within either the company or worldwide. Even it's gonna push people to take it to the next level.
Key is gamification.
Right.
Basically taking something non-game related and making it a game.
Yeah, it definitely makes it a little bit more interesting what you're doing every day, right? Like, doing that training. If we had driven out into a field in West Texas and you had told me, hey, I need you to move this to this tank instead, and I was like, it's not really that cool, but to get in there and learn it in that way, it definitely, it feels different, right? But you're still getting the practical knowledge.
It's also a long-term cost savings.
Absolutely.
You don't have to ship someone overseas or to a facility or even to a mock training area. You can run them through this at least to the point. There's a point where they always need to be tested out there, right? But you could eliminate a lot of that by doing this because you can make it feel like the real thing. So I think there's a lot. It's hard for people to quantify that right now, and that's a little bit of the you mentioned like money, right?
Right.
And it is expensive. You're creating a video game, but you got to try to think about the savings there, and not only that, but the potential life savings, especially when you're dealing with the safety pieces, with like hazard identification. Stop work authority, all life-saving rules are a big one. Every company has 8 to 10 life-saving rules, right? And all of them are very similar. And so embracing that inside the game where, actually, there's a really good quote that I saw, and it was from Jake Dunnigan. And he said, it's better to be surprised by a simulation than blindsided by reality.
Correct.
And that's exactly where the value of this comes in, is the more we can let people – sounds weird, die or cause injury in the simulation.
Right.
That's a hell of a lot better than doing it in the real world.
Absolutely.
And how do you put a value on that?
Correct. But you'll also see that stop work authority is a great discussion point because they've proven that the person that you give stop work authority to, it's a function of their personality. There's a lot of personality types and a lot of people. They say about 1% of people can actually handle the authority of a stop work authority. Like offshore drilling, that's multiple millions of dollars an hour, and you're going to be the person that pulls the stop work authority. That's a personality characteristic that you could run 100 people through on a sim and not tell them that it's a stop work authority sim, but see who steps up and does that. There's a screening process there. There's a recruiting process there. There's a character trait reveal, whatever you want to call it, but it's immersive enough to where you could trick somebody in to not, into not doing the stop work or doing the stop work.
And it's not, this idea of using this type of technology for immersive training is not necessarily new, right? The airlines, for example, have been training pilots this way.
Oh, yeah.
But it's been extremely cost prohibitive, right? This is not something that is easily available to the masses. And with this type of hardware and software, it's much more readily available, right? Especially for our industry here in construction, much easier or lower entry.
Big time. The cockpit simulations are incredible, but they have to literally recreate it, and then the windows are screens, right? And every change, that hardware changes over time, right? What's great about VR is that you can change that stuff inside software, so you're not having to always focus on just hardware, software, right? And we've been working on things where you're putting in control panels, and what's crazy is I was kind of nervous. Like, what is it like to move a joystick? And how do you move that joystick a little bit and not a lot? But the responsiveness and the accuracy is really strong. So I mean, you can grab this joystick and you can just kind of turn it a little bit, or you can move it a lot, and it feels comfortable.
Yeah.
Even doing the valves. So in the demo y'all did, you have these valves, but think about this: your hand is free. There's nothing stopping you from grabbing that fixed valve and then ripping your hand away. So how do you make that user experience work? And it's interesting to work through, but you have to make sure that, they may not turn it perfect. So you have to have a little give on how they turn it. And eventually, as they pull their hand away and they're gripping this valve, it has to snap off of the valve.
Right.
There's little things that people don't notice that are actually quite complicated.
Sure.
But so much easier, again, to solve those problems in a simulation. And it is much easier to immerse people inside an environment like that now.
Absolutely.
So speaking to the training and the cost of training, I would say in our industry as consultant engineer, training ranges from probably $500 a person to like $2,000 a person. For the full gamut of training, $2,000 would be on the very, very high end. $500 a year, pretty realistic. Where would a per person seat, like would you build a warehouse and have a VR warehouse for training, or just kind of bring them in? What would you sell for like an experience and a training experience? Or
Yeah. So I think the first thing is you don't need a big room, right? That's the value prop here, is that you can do it in a big room and you can do it in a smaller room. You have control over that. So it's mobile.
Okay.
So I would say the first thing I would do is I wouldn't put a fixed location together. I would say maybe regionally, you can set it up or even be able to give them to groups of employees to use, right, inside their own environment. That's already a benefit because you want to try to avoid all the logistics of travel. That's another benefit of it. But I mean, when you think about how it's charged, right?
Yeah.
We build the experience, and so it's the company that has it. How they want to price it is really, they can follow the same traditional pattern they have. If they're like, hey, like we're a company that trains people, so we're going to build out this module and people can come and train with us like they normally do, and they can use this as an option versus the traditional, right? And they can charge for those seats, and that's again how they can make back the return on their investment while delivering by far a better way for people to learn. Now, the one thing you have to do is balance it out. This will not replace all of the course material.
Yeah.
It's just not realistic.
Yeah.
But what it is, it's a great thing to do after. Instead of like, okay, I'm gonna learn all this information, I'm gonna take this test, and that's it. Once I pass the test, I'm done. That's when they do their brain dump, right? I mean, I did that in school all the time. I learned 2 years of Spanish. I don't know any words, right? Because I would memorize all of the words. I would take the vocabulary test, and then a week later, I don't remember anything, maybe 20%, right? So what you would do here is you would pick the training modules that you want to add the gamification component to that add the most value.
Yeah.
And then you basically say, okay, you've learned all this information. You've passed. Great job. Now I want you to go through and show me that you can do this procedure, or that you truly understand hazards, right? As an example, like put them in, randomize the hazards.
Yeah.
And see that. And some of that could also be stop work authority, right? Like they could go in and identify things that are out of place or things that people are doing wrong. So that's kind of how I would play it is again, not replacing it all, but definitely taking some of that and putting it into the game.
So you're really focusing on retention with it. Like it's an added layer. It's not a replacement.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say it can replace some, right? But it's definitely not going to replace all of it, because let's be honest, it's a lot easier to build a whole lot of content in like an LMS, right? But it's boring. No one wants to get through it. You literally are gutting it out. And the problem with that is when you're dealing with something that's so important, like saving lives, you lose that when you're bored to death. And unfortunately, you shouldn't be. Like, you should understand why you should care. But if you're going to learn something really basic, that's just standard stuff, like I wouldn't really embrace that inside this, just because it wouldn't be cost effective.
So one of the things that we did in college was we looked at a lot of different welding fails to just learn what a failed weld looks like and the different ways a weld could fail. And I mean, it was crazy boring, because it's just slideshow after slideshow And I accidentally retained some of it because, thank God we didn't have smartphones back then, But I see a huge value in that, in the fatigue analysis of structural components. Big problem we have in our industry is we have people coming out of college, but they've never been in a mechanical room. They don't know what the failures are. I don't. I still need to learn more about the failures. And I see this as a huge, like you do a casual walkthrough and you're like, oh, here's what we would do. We would do like build an environment that is a facility condition assessment. And we grade each person that walked through based on their final report and their prioritization of what equipment needed to be replaced. Because the problem you have is in our industry, it's a lot of opinion. And the number of engineers you hire is the number of opinions you're going to get, right? So we had this engineer's cup. Oh, man, every engineer I've ever met would sign up for this. And they'd be like, because then they would finally be the rightest of right.
Sure.
But man, that would be huge value. As a client, I'd be like, well, why would I hire your firm to do a facility condition assessment? Oh, because my staff has been put into this competition. We accurately identified which equipment needed to be prioritized and put together in a facility management plan and put across on a budgeting strategy. That would be huge. That would be a huge training event for an added layer of retention and exposure in our industry.
And I think that's a perfect segue to talk about, how can we apply either this technology specifically or, some other options that are out there to the design phase of commercial construction.
Yeah, so the design phase is interesting because most of the time you're using what? Blueprints, doing
CAD,
some things in the CAD, Revit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Revit's actually making some really big strides.
Right.
Revit's starting to introduce the ability to put it into VR and be able to actually visualize it a little more. I mean, it's still not as immersive as you think, but you can see it. You can get down to the ground level and all of that. And so, to me, where the design phase comes into play is two-part. One, you can actually get a feel for it. So, our office space is a good example. When we had one unit and then we expanded over 2 units. We wanted to really understand what it would feel like to be in the office.
Yeah.
And more importantly, what we were going for is like this industrial treehouse.
Right. Oh, you did it. You hit it spot
Awesome.
on.
Thank
like
you. Thank you.
Definitely.
I'm not an architect, so I didn't have like the words, but I'm gonna start saying industrial treehouse like every 5 minutes.
Awesome.
now.
Awesome. I like it. So we wanted to have someone when they walk in, the first thing they do is stop and kind of like pan from the left side all the way to the right.
Yep.
And how do we really get that feeling like if we're just drawing it up, right?
Sure. Right.
So we put it in VR, and now we were able to go to the front door and look, and we got the true scale and the exact view that they would see. We even added the photos on the outside of the window so we could see the environment, right? So that it felt real.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it was awesome. We could see how it was like to walk in the conference room.
Yep.
And how in all these different views. So it was really cool. I mean, it really helped us truly understand what the design was going to look like in real life. And honestly, when it was built, it felt exactly the same.
Nice.
And I think that's the value of what it brings to the design phase. The trickiest thing that's always been a factor is taking these engineer files and putting them into VR, because the technology doesn't work that well together. They've been working it out for years on how do you take perfect math with a whole lot of geometry in there, right, and move it to polygons, which is what we work in. So that's the trick. But Revit has done some stuff where you can look and see how, through different platforms. It's another company offering a platform that you can take into Revit, right, into VR, but visualize it better without having to go through the process of converting it, because if you're always doing that through the design phase, you're never going to get there.
Sure.
The last one is collaboration, especially dealing with something like COVID where people were remote. Like you could have people get into a simulation together and collaborate on the design, drop to the ground floor, see what it and discuss it, and actually collaborate in VR.
So I see that collaboration in VR as that would be huge, and the ability to, instead of having people come up with their own 3D mental image of the space, because what you find is everyone, depending on what their history of training is, like mine's mechanical, I can you can explain a mechanical room to me and I'll be able to picture it. But someone just with as many years of experience but in a different trade or a different discipline is going to have a different perspective of that. So getting all the perspectives out and in front of each other is huge. But the big argument that I've heard for the last 10 years, and it's starting to get a little different because of contractors moving more towards using Revit as a conflicts resolution through Navisworks. But the old sentiment is Revit is the biggest waste of money and time. We're spending all this effort extending our liability really to put all of this content in a 3D model, and then we print it out in 2D. It's like, what did we just do there? So it's like we moved forward while having the same deliverable, and that's the problem. The deliverable has to change. And I don't know what that deliverable is going to look like in the future, but maybe that's what AR can do.
On that note, so I mean, you're it's fragmented. It's kind of what you identified, and I totally agree. It's kind of weird how it's like one thing comes here, and then you deliver this, right? One thing that's really wild, and this is not necessarily just in the design phase, but let's say you have it in the 3D file where augmented reality comes into play. Is there's like the HoloLens, which is a Microsoft product that you put on your face, and it can track an environment extremely well. That's the value it brings. But I mean, I've seen a demo where a person's in the construction site, the building is there, and they are looking at air duct, and the design, the digital piece comes into play all around them.
Right.
They can look up and say, okay, here's the air duct, right? Oh, it's U-ing off this way, or it's L-ing this way, and it should be going straight for another 6 feet. And you can clearly see it versus trying to reference a flat 2D blueprint and then trying to compare it, and that's really hard to do.
Correct.
So that's where I think AR comes into play, is making sure the design, the investment of that you've put in, you can use it during the build process, and that's where the design and build really kind of come together in the digital form.
But the problem you have in our industry is, okay, let's say that duct is off by 6 feet. Okay, who's going to settle that argument? Who's going to settle that money?
Well, and also in the meantime, 3 other trades have put stuff where the duct was supposed to go.
Right.
Yeah. So now it's like this massive thing to unwind.
Right. Like it's kind of at a place to where it's almost like we didn't know the details, and so it was okay. But now we know the details, and now we're dealing with that devil, because like it would be great to see that. It'd be almost an auto inspection. But from a contracting perspective, I'm talking about pieces of paper that we all sign and get paid for them. Whose scope of work is to reconcile the differences between the AR, the design, from engineers that haven't really built anything, but know the math and the theory, and then you have the contractors that build things, but maybe don't understand the math and the theory so much. Like, who would reconcile that scope gap is the problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think that from the business side, that's identifying those is like, I mean, obviously, if they build it wrong,
right,
from the design, then typically it would fall on the person building it. But that'd be for them to work out. I think the cool part though is that the technology is really highlighting these problems, right? And it's opening up the thing that, hey, like there's some problems here that have been happening, and they're basically behind a wall, right? And that can lead to problems in the future. You know, when if they failed, they did something wrong, right? And it somehow passed inspection, I guess it can cause some exposure, some liability risk. So.
Yeah, it's like an automatic inspection tool. And it's kind of like that stop work authority person, like that person's a certain personality type. Man, everybody hates the inspector, and everybody hates the quality guy as well, or quality person. So it's like, how do you, I mean, you're like, a very detailed quality person is like that best friend that you hate to introduce to your other friends. It's like, because they're like, you didn't tie your shoes right. Like, that's the quality person you need.
I think that technology helps. So a lot of times accountability is tough, right? That's what causes controversy, right? And the better accountability you can have with systems, the less people have to do it, and that's where tension's caused. So, one thing I take pride in my company is the culture of our company is very strong. Our operations side, people stay a long time, but we do have a lot of systems in place where they are, they're tracking their time towards tasks. We're evaluating how well we're doing on our 2-week sprints and things like that. And so the systems really tell them that stuff. Like, we don't have to bark at them.
Right.
Like, we'll just look at it again and say, okay, well, what went wrong here? And let's solve this, right? And I think that comes into play with this. So the more the technology can say, I mean, look, it's wrong. It's clearly wrong. It's not supposed to happen. The less tension probably is going to be caused between, the people that are mostly hated. Like hopefully it makes their life a little easier because the proof is in the design.
They don't have to bark at them because they already have the incident report or the failure report.
Look at it, right?
Yeah.
And maybe longer term, the inspector isn't the only one wearing the HoloLens too, right? I mean, the guy installing the ductwork might actually be able to see in real time where
that's the plan,
where it should go, right?
That's the plan.
That would be really
it's the plan A. Hey, look, you're building it, hold it up. As you are managing your people, make sure they're doing it right.
Right.
That's definitely the key.
So you had talked about a different technology for the design phase that wasn't necessarily VR, AR. It was more of like a scaled model.
Well, I mean, when you deal with AR, so it's interesting with AR because there's so many different ways you can activate it.
Okay.
And so when you're thinking of AR, when you're sitting in the environment, right, it's all around you.
Okay.
And it feels very different than if it's just on the table. And so if you did augmented reality on a scaled down model, I guess probably the best thing people can see that is like Matterport. So when you take
what's Matterport?
Yeah, so it's a technology out there, started in real estate and it's moved, far beyond that at this point, but it's not like a full 3D. It takes photos and it stitches photos together. So kind of like Google Street View, where you can jump down the street and get a 360 perspective from that point. That's what Matterport does. So people can basically take this thing, put it in a place. It takes a scan, they move it, and now it builds those little hot spots that you can kind of jump to. Well, what's really cool about it, though, is once you do a whole house, we'll say, or a full facility, it allows you to look at it like called a dollhouse view.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which means you can basically drop it down like this and see it like a dollhouse and move it around.
Yep.
It's not pretty, but you can see the structure and you know that you can click in, it'll take you into that spot in the facility. That's pretty cool. So it's easy to build it.
Yeah, and we're already doing that. Like at KCI, we're doing things like that and adding that to our room by room data sheets. So you're looking at that room, you zoom into that room, you click here, and now you have your 360-degree view. You have your data sheets over here. In the 360-degree view, we're even looking at how do we take that to the level to where the pieces that we want to remove, we turn red, and the pieces that are going to be replaced in like a year to 2 years turn yellow, and the pieces of equipment that are good for 5 years plus turn green. So we add a hatching on that as well. Instead of providing a facility condition, it's more like a website, an interactive website.
Sure. And so like on the note of what you mentioned, like that Matterport idea of the dollhouse, like you can do that in AR, right? Okay. So let's imagine that the stakeholders wanted to review a blueprint, and they wanted to see more of that 3D element, kind of like my office on the business card. That like kind of more on steroids, where it shows up on a table, and you can move it around. You can maybe click on a room, see the dimensions of the room, kind of get a little bit of a higher level perspective versus in location. So with augmented reality, there's like multiple ways to trigger that thing. So the first one is image-based, right, which is basically tracking an image and putting that asset on the image. Second one is environment-based, which means I can hold it up. It knows a ground plane like the table, and I can place my object in the environment. The third one is object recognition, which means it's tracking the geometry of a specific piece of equipment or object and putting overlays on top of that or activating it how you want. The last one is basically area. So the idea of walking in and it mapping the area. So for some things, it's taking scans and basically bringing it in and mapping the area that way. And that's kind of where the design meets construction side. I mean, you can even do GPS-based, but that's a little trickier with accuracy because people are like, oh, GPS-based. Yeah, you're going to put it right in the latitude and longitude. I'm like, no, I'm going to put it in the latitude and longitude that your device is telling me it is, right?
Right.
And it sounds funny to say it like that, but that device is telling me that it's here where it may not be there, maybe 20 feet, right? So those are the different ways you can do augmented reality activation.
Interesting.
With the like recognition of what's going on there, is it like a QR code? Is it like a barcode, or is it like the physical shape of the deal? Because you have, I mean, we could do laser scans that have that shape outline, but
Yeah.
like,
So the 3 ways. So the image base, what it's doing is it's basically looking for like points.
okay,
And some and contrasting colors work too. So like it tracks those points, and that's when it knows where it needs to stick.
okay,
For the object, it's recognizing, the shape, the structure,
Okay.
right? And so the more structure you can have, the more detail, it's key, right? From the facility side, it's just taking that scan and it's recognizing basically when you take that scan and you're getting that full 360 perspective and the scale of it.
Mhm.
That's really key, so the device can then trigger it that way.
okay. So, but if you had two identical pumps,
Yes,
Ye-
that's where it becomes tricky. So
Okay.
unless you're doing facility, then you would know what's on the left
Yeah.
and the right. But if you're doing individual, right? So
Right.
here's where it gets kind of tricky. Is like it does a really good job. Object-based recognition does a really good job of finding. Okay, so I want to find a toilet
right,
coffee cup, right? So
Right.
so why am I saying that? Because he's drinking one. But
Yeah.
you hold it up and it would recognize that. But if it was this, it might get them confused.
okay,
Because they're very, very close. So what you can do is we call that a false positive, right?
okay,
And I think that's going to improve.
Yeah.
But if they're close in shape, it's going to probably cause some issues. I mean, we did a project once where we were trying to recognize components, individual components, not the entire thing,
okay,
and it would struggle with which ones. There's two that are very similar, so it would sometimes cause that false positive. When you get into like machine learning and you keep telling that application that no, that's not the right one, then eventually it can learn
Okay.
to not look at that one. But that's that's a little couple more years
right.
in the
Couple years
future.
down the
But
line.
but think about it this way: if you're recognizing the whole object,
Right,
then you know where those components will be.
correct,
If you're recognizing a whole facility, you should know,
right,
or a
Well-
portion of the facility. That's kind of how you would work that use case to avoid
Okay.
a false positive.
And I see it where if you had the laser scan, you would have the GIS positioning as well. I mean, so yeah, your phone might tell you you're 20 feet off, but it seems like a QR code would hone you in. But you don't want to. Your whole point is not physically having human beings go and label everything.
It's possible. I mean, we did it. We actually worked with a project where they had a facility, and we were generating augmented reality markers,
Okay.
where kind of like QR codes, they generate a unique pattern.
Okay.
They had a back-end system that we built that would allow them to basically drop all the information about their products in. And it would
Yes.
generate a unique code for each one. And they went around
Yep.
and they tagged that equipment.
Yeah.
And you can open the device, you point it, and the information pulls up.
Right.
And they basically decided what information would go in. And then also, because all that's trackable, now we can track that and say, okay, like people are going to this area and this is what they're looking at
Yep.
and for how long, and so we can build the analytics around that too. So that is a possibility if that's something people want to invest in. As far as it, one would argue at this point, is it better to activate that facility?
Right.
If equipment's moving around though,
right.
activating the facility could be a problem. If it's not, if it's pretty much static,
Stagnant.
yeah, it would be a doable thing. So those are just like that's stuff that we work through, right? It's like
Yeah.
what use case are you using? What problem are you solving?
Yeah.
What environment are you doing it in? What devices are we using? Is it better to go hands-free with a wearable? Or is it better to be, with a phone or a tablet?
And so we've touched on it a little bit. I mean, and obviously the design and the construction of these buildings kind of bleed together, especially with how fast some of these projects are coming
Right.
out of the ground now. So when you're talking about the construction phase, what technology is going to be applicable to construction for us?
When you're in the construction phase right now.
Yeah. We're building the building right now.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that can be is like you have a lot of stakeholders, and most of them want to be involved in the process, but it's sometimes hard logistically to get them there, right? So one of the things that you can definitely do is provide a way for them to see that in a simulation. This could be as simple as 360 video, or even just photos, and then put them in there and let them look around, or just hold your device up and look around the facility to give them up-to-date information without having them to travel there. Another thing is remote expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bringing them into the construction site, letting them do a walkthrough and highlight things they want to discuss.
So from being a major projects PM, what I would like to see in this augmented reality is that, okay, you have your tracking actions and coordination items on like a Gantt chart or some kind of table of some kind. But what I would like to see is I'd like to see Post-its hanging in the air. Like we're in a building. Okay, we're in this room and there's a Post-it from the mechanical contractor to the electrical contractor, hey, I'm not done, but I'll be there tomorrow.
Sure.
Right? And he just walks in a room, gets an alert that there's, pink. Oh yeah, that was on that report in that email who cares to read? but it was hanging in the air and I grabbed it and now I've read it. All right, thanks dude. And be back. That's the level. And with this virtual reality, augmented reality, AI, machine learning, I want to stay away from removing humans from the workforce. I want to keep humans in the workforce, but helping us communicate. One of the old sayings is the greatest lie of communication is that it actually happened. And, right. So that's, using this information and artificial intelligence and machine learning to make us better. That's where I would love to see it. And then just having a sticky note hanging in the air, man, that'd be huge.
Yeah, I mean, the more you can activate it and provide information in the easiest way possible, like in your face, the better. And,
yes.
and I think some people get afraid that these tools are like taking away their jobs, but really it's just helping them be safer and do their job better, especially when you're talking about things like AR, right? But it gets tricky. There's a lot of technical hurdles to overcome because a construction site is always growing and changing. Right. I mean, if not, you wouldn't be building anything. Right. So, so the only problem is like if you're trying to activate an area, right? Like it's tough to do that if it's an environment that's always changing. So, there's ways to do it, and there's a lot of work. I mean, sometimes we've just built applications that are like when someone's checking in to do that process, it's pinging them, right? And so sometimes they are maybe too far for a company at that point, and so you find a good application that still allows them to solve that problem. But
what about Spot the Dog from Boston Robotics, or was it?
Oh yeah.
You have a whole bunch of Spot the Dogs walking around. You could probably map the environment and keep everything real time.
Now you're going crazy.
I'm going crazy.
I mean,
I'm 50 years out right now.
You must be halfway through that.
I'm halfway through. You don't know. Yeah.
I saw that demo video. This I guess was last week or whatever.
Yeah.
I think you shared it. I was blown away. I mean, I've been watching those videos, especially the spin-offs and the memes and all that, where they're kicking the robot and it's doing whatever. But I mean, it is incredible what that thing has turned into, and to think that those could be walking around on the site doing the mapping or some of these other functions are pretty incredible. And again, when you look at it on paper, you're like, okay, $80,000 for a robot dog seems expensive, but I mean, the potential that you can get out of it is pretty incredible.
Hey, and it's going to go down in price. It's it's all very new, right? So it's always an interesting balance between when to jump into the technology.
Right.
It's like when I do my educational presentation about AR and VR in general, like you look at the market and it's growing, right? But right now they're predicting by 2025 for it to be comparable to the smartphone market in 2018, which is, I mean, that's a massive market. Yeah. Right. But when you see 2024, it's like here, and then there's a huge jump for 2025, and everyone's like, well, why is there such a big jump? And the simplest answer in my theory is the AR hardware.
Yeah.
The headsets become smaller.
Battery technology.
Field of view is a big factor for me. Like, if you guys have ever worn an augmented reality headset?
Yes.
No.
I've done the HoloLens.
Okay. So the HoloLens, the first version, is like a 30-degree field of view. So a little fun exercise is take your hands and go like this. Yeah. And that's about your field of view on the first one. Now, the second one is a 52-degree field of view. So now it's going to be like this. And the problem with that is now you have this awesome piece of technology on your head that has this huge kind of shield, but you're really only be able to see any of the digital assets that are within that little screen finder. And it's also $3,500, and the battery life's not that long.
Yeah.
Right? It's always a debate, and I always tell people think mobile first because they've already scaled into phones and tablets.
Right.
Think mobile, and if you need to be hands-free, then we'll work through that. There's a bunch of different wearables that you can look at, all serve different use cases. Going back to your original question about where it can fit in construction.
Okay.
I think there's two major benefits outside of what we discussed. The first one is by far remote expert.
Okay.
So when someone's on a construction site, when in doubt, ask somebody, right? But sometimes it's hard to do that when everyone's doing their own job. And so remoting someone in and allowing them to help you through it is really a critical thing. The second one, it's not exactly like it is augmented reality in essence, but it's not like the idea of putting a digital asset. But there's a wearable called RealWear,
Okay.
Are y'all familiar with that one?
Nope.
No.
Okay, so RealWear is very similar to what we're wearing right now. It clips onto a hard hat. It's intrinsically safe.
Okay.
But this little lever that goes in front of your face is a screen. Okay?
Interesting.
And so when you look into the screen, it feels like a 7-inch tablet.
Okay.
And everything's voice activated. But you're able to bring in documentation and information right into that screen. And it has the ability to do remote expert.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
So the benefit is that now, if I need to do a procedure, I walk over,
Right.
then maybe a note's already there for me. So
Right.
before I start my procedure, it pings that note and says, hey, I'm not done yet, right?
Right.
Hold this off for another day, right? You
Right.
have those work orders.
Right.
And you can bring in specs and documentation and information in there. And what's great about RealWear is voice activation. It handles really loud environments. I mean, really loud environments extremely well.
Interesting.
So the con, it can be pretty expensive, especially for the intrinsically safe ones. And you have to teach someone how to do the voice activation.
Yeah.
So there's a training element of getting people familiar with how to get the voice activation. I haven't seen it in a while, but I know that the voice activation on the one that I did, I don't know, maybe it was a year and a half ago, was very granular.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of say like, next page, select 3.
Yeah.
Yes, next, right?
Wow, that'd be
and,
tough.
And I think they're going to get to the point where it's a little more, let's call it Alexa, right?
Yeah.
Where it's a little more
Conversational.
flexible with what you can say, and it still understands those commands. And they may have already gotten there. But that's, to me, right now, with an environment that's always adapting, you're basically not caring about the environment. You're bringing everything into here and giving them some power, fast.
Well, and to your point of the cost of spot, $75,000. You got to remember that a land survey crew is about $2,000 a day. So that price gets eroded pretty fast.
Well, yeah.
And then communicating with the voice activation, I forget who makes the wrist bracelets that pay attention to the flexing of your muscles, but
Yep.
I mean, we're like 2 years away from Minority Report. Everyone's going to turn into Tom Cruise, and then that's going to be a huge problem.
It sounds dumb, but like there are like ways that you could have a screen on your wrist, and
Yeah.
instead of having to do voice, like you're able to type or click or use something kind of like
Right.
a smartphone on your arm. And it sounds dumb, but if you have this headset or you're using something here and you're able to quickly type things in and do what you wanted to do
Yeah.
here, like again, that's something to work through on. Is that the right use case, right?
Right.
If you're not needing to input a lot of data,
Right.
then that may not be necessary. Voice is fine because
Right.
you're doing a step-by-step procedure where you're just verifying you're doing it, you're completing it and moving on to the next step.
I would see the device as pushing data to you and not you documenting the data backwards in like a retrospect as to check compliance with the design and inspection and the codes. It would be a push information and not a...
Definitely, unless you're doing like, hey, I'm checking this off, so I have 20
Right.
steps.
Do
Okay,
your
I just
punch
completed
punch
it.
list, yeah.
Maybe snapping a picture of it.
Right.
That way you have this log of what you did.
Commissioning would be the opposite.
Yeah. The other, I guess the last one, thinking off the top of my head, is like assembly and disassembly processes. So you could, instead of having just a video, like a YouTube tutorial, right, so to speak,
Right.
where they're going through this step by step, you could bring that into the physical world. They could place it next to the actual equipment or on the equipment and show what that step by step process would be.
You could save about 1 million marriages if you talk to IKEA. Their step-by-step little cartoon nonsense they have going on.
It's painful.
It's painful. If you haven't put together anything from IKEA, you need to, because I tell you, I don't know where they think those things work, but they don't. And you could save, man, you could be like, all the divorce lawyers would hate you. Just go in and to make IKEA do this right with the augmented step-by-step.
Had some bad experiences, huh?
Oh, yeah, several. Because then you mess it up, and you're like, oh, great, I've spent $500, and I'm the one that messed this up, and now it's got a scratch and a dent. No, thank you.
Yeah, you got to have patience and a good back to put IKEA
man.
stuff. I started doing it on a table because I couldn't hunch over and
I know.
do it on the floor anymore.
Yeah, once I hit my mid-30s, I noticed that like if I'm assembling something and I'm like bent over even slightly for more than like, I don't know, 5 minutes, my back starts aching. And I'm like, this is depressing.
Yep. Got to get that upright, get that workbench going.